Today is July 3rd. Tomorrow is Independence Day, which is the proper name for it. We have two more interviews with state legislators on the special session and red flag laws coming up. We celebrate liberty and how it was won tomorrow, and the fact that our personal firearms were very important to that cause should be noted. Our guest is Representative Gino Bulso. Can you tell us what district you represent and what your committee assignments are?
Sure, Richard, I'm happy to. I represent House District 61, which is most of the city of Brentwood, just south of Nashville, and a good chunk of the city of Franklin, all the way down to Highway 96. I've got 6 different committee assignments. I'm on the Civil Justice Committee, also on the Civil Justice Subcommittee. I'm on the Education Administration Committee and the K through 12 Subcommittee. Then also I'm on Government Operations, and then on the Joint Judiciary and Government Committee.
What are your thoughts regarding the need for the special session that Governor Lee has demanded?
Well, I'm actually excited about the special session, Richard. Obviously, anytime we're talking about public safety, we're going to have an opportunity to address the issue of the root causes of violence that we see across the country. And I know that you're a student of American government, of American history, and you know that going all the way back to George Washington's farewell address in 1796, he talked about the fact that religion and morality were the two, quote, indispensable supports of our political prosperity. And then several decades later, after he had toured the country, including Nashville, French political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville wrote that wonderful work, Democracy in America. And he also recognized that there were 3 reasons in his view that democracy was successful in America: the circumstances of the country, the laws of the country, but most importantly, what he called the mores of the country. And it's really those that have changed over time, not access to firearms. So in the special session, I think we will undoubtedly have an opportunity to address some of these underlying root causes. So I'm looking forward to it.
At this time, what are your thoughts regarding the red flag law or extreme risk protection order that Governor Lee is seeking, which allows the government to seize guns from individuals who presently can legally own and possess them?
A couple of things. First, as I understand the governor's proposal, although he has put out there a proposed red flag law or an extreme risk protection order law, his motivation principally is to focus our state on this issue of public safety. So I do not believe that the special session is going to be devoted just to one particular type of proposal, but I think it's going to be broader than that, Richard. And then secondly, it really isn't a question so much of what I think about a red flag law. It's really a question of what the Constitution requires. And we're living in a very interesting age because over the past 15 years, we've had a trilogy of Supreme Court cases that have expounded on the meaning of the Second Amendment. And as a consequence, we've got clarity now that we didn't have several years ago. And the trilogy, of course, started with the Supreme Court's decision in Heller, District of Columbia versus Heller, back in 2008, where Justice Scalia and a majority of 5 determined that, in fact, the Second Amendment does protect an individual's right to keep and bear arms. It's not any type of a collective right. And also the core holding of Heller was that self-defense was a principal motivation of our founders in passing the Second Amendment as part of the Bill of Rights back on December 15 of 1791. And then just 2 years later, we had the McDonald versus City of Chicago case that Justice Alito wrote the opinion on. And that was an equally important decision where the court found that the 14th Amendment actually incorporates the Second Amendment as a restriction on the power of not just the federal government, but upon states. And you'll recall, Richard, that Chicago was interesting because in 2009, they passed a law that effectively banned possession of handguns in the city. And I know this will surprise you, but drug dealers and gang members and other criminals didn't actually rush to turn in their weapons. And so as Justice Alito canvasses in his opinion, the statistics from the Chicago Police Department showed that the murder rate actually increased after that ban was put in place. So ultimately, the Supreme Court correctly ruled that, in fact, the 14th Amendment does incorporate the Second Amendment. It is a restriction on the power of states. And then, of course, most recently, in the trilogy last year, we had the decision from Justice Thomas in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, where the court gave us a very easy to apply test in determining the constitutionality of any law that any state in the country might pass. And so first we look at the question of, does the law regulate the Second Amendment? Obviously, a red flag law that would attempt to dispossess a citizen of firearms regulates the Second Amendment. But the key part of the test is the second one. The second question is that the court will ask is, is the law, consistent with our nation's history and tradition of firearm regulation? If the answer to that question is no, then the law simply cannot be passed because it's unconstitutional. And that, I think, very clearly is where these red flag laws or ERPO laws fall. There's nothing in the history and tradition of our country's regulation of firearms that has a place for dispossessing citizens who are not criminals, who've done nothing wrong. You can go all the way back to December 15 of 1791, and never was it known to our law that you could have a state actually confiscate weapons from citizens. And so I think it's not so much a question, Richard, of what I think. I think the Constitution compels the answer that a proposed red flag law is simply unconstitutional.
What alternatives to these red flag or ERPO laws do you think should be considered by the legislature?
I think we should consider many alternatives from small to large. And there are a number of things that we can do as a General Assembly coming together that I think will advance public safety and school security. One thing that comes to mind, Richard, is that we had this horrible shooting on March 27 at the Covenant School here in Nashville, in the Nashville area in Middle Tennessee. One of the things that we noticed was that that school did not have at the time an SRO present, and so that you had to have administrators on campus call 911, and then 911 had to dispatch law enforcement. Well, I think we can actually address the fact that schools should be able, whether they're public schools or private schools, obviously, should be able to have direct dispatch without having to go through 911, because that will save us, in many cases, 4 or 5 minutes, which can be critical. Now, obviously, at Covenant, I think ultimately the record shows that it took 14 minutes for law enforcement to arrive. But if we can actually have all schools, private or public, with direct dispatch, that's going to save lives. It's going to improve school security. And then obviously, we've got the fact that we've got a problem with suicides, both in Tennessee and across the country. Our Department of Health came out with a study earlier this year that showed for 2021, we had something in the neighborhood of 1,220 suicides in Tennessee, most of which were with firearms. And I think there are things we can do to address suicide prevention, including working with retailers and gun manufacturers to include in their collateral materials a card that has the 988 suicide hotline prevention number in their materials. We can also, of course, address some of these issues that come to the fore every year with regard to background checks, storage, and training. I think we're at a stage now where, under Title 39, we do have the TBI available to conduct background checks in sales in the secondary market of firearms, but there's a cost associated with it. And sometimes it's somewhat time-consuming for individuals who want to conduct a background check to go to a firearms dealer. And so I think we can look at rolling back the cost of background checks and just eliminating that $10 fee and encouraging the TBI to come out with an app that would make it more efficient for citizens who want to engage in a background check in a secondary sale to be able to do that very efficiently, quickly, and without cost. And then finally, with regard to storage, we had the sales tax of gun safes go off just this past July 1st. And I think we need to put that back in place. That is, we need to make sure that Tennesseans can access gun safes without having to pay sales tax. That's a nice encouragement. So that's one thing we can do with regard to storage. And then with regard to training, Richard, I mean, obviously, whatever we can do to eliminate or reduce the cost of folks to be trained on firearms they purchase, we need to look at doing that as well. There are several revenue sources already available in state government, and we accessed one of those earlier this year in a bill that was sponsored by Representative Sabi Kumar. I think there's more that can be done there as well. So we can make progress on all these other issues in a way that's constitutional and that encourages safe and responsible gun ownership across the state.
Do you have any other thoughts on these issues that we've discussed that might not have been addressed in the questions that I've asked?
Oh, probably just this, Richard. You know, it's common for Americans sometimes to disagree about the balance that we have between freedom and security. And there are many on the other side of this issue who are people of good faith that, for one reason or another, want to sacrifice some freedoms for security. And it's important that we have in the legislative debate civility. And we've not always had that in recent past here in Tennessee, particularly in the House of Representatives. And so I think it's going to be important that when all these folks come together on August 21 to debate these issues, that it's done with civility. There are some on the other side, unfortunately, Richard, who are not going to be civil. I think we know that already. We know that they're going to come and try to create something of a chaotic circumstance. And I think our highway patrol will be ready for that. I think law enforcement will be ready for that. And, you know, it's interesting that we're talking here on the eve of July the 4th, where we had 56 of our greatest citizens, you know, pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to advance liberty and freedom across the country. And the least we can do as members of the General Assembly is to show up, even if there is some danger involved, use what we can to advance the cause of freedom and liberty across the state. So those are my only other thoughts, that I'm excited about having the debate. It has to be done civilly, and I think we'll be able to accomplish that.
Representative Bulso, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come and do this interview. It gives the rest of our membership across the state the opportunity to see and hear thoughts from those who actually are involved in the process. So I really appreciate your time, and we thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Richard. It's been my pleasure.
If you learned something today that was beneficial, hit the like and subscribe button. It helps get our message out and sell the brand. Check back for more content as often as you can. You can find our website at www.tennesseefirearms.com. If you are new there, click the subscribe button on that page as well to receive free email updates about issues that affect your Second Amendment rights in Tennessee.